I cheated while my husband was on a mission out of the country. With the help of my father-in-law, he discovered everything and took revenge. Today I carry on my face the scars of the karma that struck me. Miguel was the type of man who solves, protects, and fulfills what he promises. A rare man. I am Lara. I was 25 years old when I met Miguel, and I worked as a secretary in a law firm. Coming from a dysfunctional family, I was always more intelligent than emotionally stable. When Miguel walked into that room for the first time seeking legal help for a client from the workshop, he did not just take me by surprise, but that presence completely swept me away. There was something in him that mixed gentleness with quiet authority, almost as if he were incapable of losing control. And maybe he was. Our first meeting was brief, but I found myself thinking about him for days and, to my surprise, he returned, only this time to ask me to dinner. Our romance was fast, but not rushed. Each of his gestures had intention, opening the car door, remembering my favorite coffee, teaching me how to move the car's hood because I said I wanted to learn. It was not just love, it was a feeling of security that I had never experienced before. Miguel spoke little of his time in the army, but the way he organized every part of his life showed that structure still lived within him. He repaired cars with the same dedication with which he took care of me, attention to detail, patience to understand the problem, and the certainty that everything could be fixed, as long as it was with the right tools. On weekends, he would take me to see the cars he was restoring in his workshop. The smell of oil and hot metal mixed with his voice, explaining everything with that sparkle in his eyes. The owner of the workshop, an old friend of his father, said that Miguel was an old-fashioned young man. And so he was. It was not just about being helpful or hardworking. Miguel had a sense of duty that made him seem like a man from another era. And that, at first, was exactly what I needed, someone who made me feel as if I were in the right place, even though I was a separate part of the world. I fell in love with Miguel in an almost childish way, as if he were my safe harbor, and perhaps that is why I began to adapt to his expectations. I became the girlfriend who does not complain, who listens and supports. I found myself giving up small personal desires to maintain harmony. And I am not going to lie, back then it did not feel like a sacrifice, it felt like gratitude. After all, how many women find a man who comes home from work covered in grease, but with flowers hidden in his backpack? It was like living in an old movie. But I forgot that even in the most beautiful movies there is a turning point. 2 years into the relationship, marriage was a natural progression. There was no flashy proposal or honeymoon in another country. In fact, there were a pair of simple rings and a serious oath exchanged in front of a few witnesses. I was ready to build a life with Miguel, or at least I thought so. But deep down there was a part of me that was not yet healed, that was still looking for something outside that world of workshops, battles, and well-defined routines. And this silent part, ignored by me, would be exactly what would destroy everything later. Miguel was never one for many words, but he showed love with actions. He fixed my things without me asking, he left notes in the house, he made long-term plans. He was the type of man who plants with the certainty that he will reap. And I reaped all of that without realizing that I was not watering it. Deep down, I knew he deserved more than what I was offering him emotionally, but I deceived myself, thinking that his love was enough for both of us. I loved him, yes, but sometimes loving is not enough when you are still broken inside. Our wedding day was simple, but full of meaning. We exchanged vows in a small room decorated by ourselves with flowers picked from Miguel's mother's garden and food prepared by his aunts. There was no luxury, but there was truth. At 27 years old, I felt that I had finally found stability. Miguel looked at me with that serene and confident expression, as if he were sure he could carry the world on his shoulders, and maybe he really could. We moved into a modest house with a wooden porch that creaked in the wind and a large garage where he already dreamed of setting up his own small workshop. I thought our life would be predictable, peaceful, and secure. I just did not imagine that the war was not yet over for him. In the first months of marriage, Miguel divided his time between the workshop and small training sessions at the base. He was a reserve player, but he played his role as if he were always ready to be called up. And I began to dream of children, of trips, of Sunday barbecues and laughter. We talked about names, about how many rooms the house would need to have. Miguel even renovated the back room with new closets for the future, as he said with a smile. I watched him measure each board as if he were building something eternal, and that made me believe that nothing could shake us. But the news began to change everything. When the conflicts in the Middle East intensified again, I noticed a restlessness growing in Miguel. He did not say it in so many words, but I saw it. He spent more time watching the news, checking old equipment, and talking with colleagues from the Guard. Then, one night after dinner, he said calmly that he had volunteered for a logistical support mission near Ramadi. Although it was not necessary, he wanted to go. He said he could not ignore the call, that a real man does not turn his face away from someone who needs him. I remained silent. I felt a coldness rise up my spine and, although I wanted to beg him to give up, I simply shook my head and said, "If that is what you feel you must do, go." Before shipping out, Miguel was meticulous about everything. He set aside every penny of his $3,100 salary, did the math, and left everything planned. $1,600 to pay the mortgage, $800 for joint accounts, and the rest, just over $700, in a savings account reserved for the future of the baby we did not have yet. I felt cared for, supported, but also caged in a responsibility I had not asked for. It was as if I had now become his safe harbor, but I never knew how to be that for anyone. He hugged me tightly at the airport with a new tattoo on his arm with a symbol of his unit and promised, "I will come back whole for you." And I smiled, even with a heavy heart. The first week without him was difficult. The house seemed larger, emptier. Everything that reminded me of Miguel hurt. But over time, this pain became routine. I woke up, went to work, paid the bills as he had planned. Miguel sent long messages, full of affection, of longing, telling stories from the field, of his comrades, of how he had helped repair an entire tank with only 2 tools. And I responded at first, but gradually I drifted away. His messages began to seem exaggerated, too dramatic. I did not want to deal with all that intensity alone. I did not know how to hold the admiration he felt for me. And it was in that emotional void that the first cracks began to appear. I started going out more with people from work, events, happy hours, dinners. Nothing major at first, just a way to fill the time. It was there that I started talking more with Marcelo, a charismatic, fun colleague, who knew how to make fun of everything and listen to my outbursts without judging me. He did not remind me of Miguel, and maybe that is why I was so drawn to him. He was the complete opposite, impulsive, chaotic, free. It was as if I was trying to anesthetize myself from the absence of someone who was everything I said I wanted, but who in practice made me feel suffocated by never making mistakes. I did not know it yet, but that was where the collapse of everything we had built began. Miguel was always intense, even in his letters. Even far away, in an isolated base near Ramadi, he found time to write long messages full of affection, details of daily military life, and promises to return soon. He talked about the shots he heard in the night, about the soldiers he lost and those he saved. But even in the midst of chaos, he began every text message with, "Hello, my beauty." It was as if he wanted to spare me the weight of it all, to protect me even from the other side of the world. But as the months went by, those messages began to annoy me. They seemed heavy, demanding, too emotional. I began to feel pressured to respond with the same intensity, and I could not. My responses gradually diminished. First, from long texts to more arid replies. Then, to days of silence. I told myself I was busy, tired, that there was no news here, but in reality, I was running away. Running away from guilt, responsibility, and facing the fact that on some level I no longer wanted to be a hero's wife. Miguel was there, risking his life, winning medals, being recognized as a symbol of bravery, and I felt like an extra in his story. And the more he shone, the more I withered. Miguel was even interviewed by a local station after a rescue operation in which he saved 2 platoon mates. I saw the article by chance on television while I was having dinner, and I confess I did not feel proud, but distanced. It was as if he were no longer mine, as if that man on TV were someone else, someone I no longer knew how to love. The guilt gnawed at me, but not enough to make me change. I started going out more often with Marcelo, without worrying if the neighbors would see him. His presence in my house became routine. And Miguel's a ghost. When Miguel was injured in an explosion and transferred to a military hospital in the United States, a colleague of his notified me by email. He had lost part of his hearing in one ear and suffered multiple injuries. It was not serious enough to fear for his life, but it was serious. And I simply did not go, I did not show up. I stayed at home, lying on the bed where we once slept together, with the cell phone in my hand, staring at the message as if it were from a stranger. Marcelo was sleeping on the couch. I turned over and tried to sleep, and still I could not cry. I think at that moment I had already emotionally disconnected from everything we were. I knew that my absence from the hospital would be a heavy blow for Miguel, but I also knew that, if I went, I would have to look him in the eye, see his disappointment, hear questions I would not have the courage to answer. So I ran away, and deep down I hoped he would not want to see me. Denial became my shield, and, while he was trying to recover from physical wounds, I was wallowing in the wounds I was digging myself and pretending they were not there. It is difficult to explain what makes a person get lost in that way. Sometimes it is not about a single mistake, but a series of small betrayals to oneself. I cheated on Miguel, yes, but before that I was already betraying everything I said I believed in: love, fidelity, the loyalty I so admired in him. I moved away from all this little by little, silently, smiling at others as if everything were fine. And in doing so, I erased the woman he loved, until all that was left was a stranger standing next to a stranger, someone who did not even try to pick him up at the hospital. And I knew that that absence would still take its toll on me. The silence between Miguel and me became an abyss. When he was finally discharged, he returned to the city on crutches, with scars on his body and an old backpack on his back. He expected to find his wife, his house, his home again, but he found the garage empty, the garden dry, and the smell of mold. The letters were piled up on the table, the trash was overflowing, and the food containers in the refrigerator were weeks out of date. Miguel called me. I ignored him. He called again. I hung up. And when he showed up unexpectedly at his old house, not even the key fit properly. The lock was worn from so much opening and closing, but not for him. What Miguel did not know was that his own father, a man who has always been suspicious, had already noticed the strange movement in the house. The neighbors had commented that a new man was coming and going frequently. My father-in-law, driven by a protective instinct, did the unthinkable. He used the copy of the key he had and went inside. He installed hidden cameras in the bedroom and the living room, placed microphones, and began to record every moment. What he found was not just a betrayal, it was humiliation, theatricality, perversion. Marcelo and I hid nothing. We turned that space into a stage for something sick, without imagining that watchful eyes were observing us. I found out I had been recorded only when the lawyers called me for a conversation. Not Miguel, but his father, showed up with an external hard drive and a look of disgust I will never forget. Within those recordings were scenes that make me nauseous to this day. Not only did we have constant intimate relations in the house Miguel bought, but Marcelo made a point of adding a dose of sadism to his fetishes. One of his fetishes was to dress me in Miguel's military uniform while we had sex, and I accepted, anesthetized by the adrenaline of the transgression. It was as if each act were not just adultery, but a calculated mockery of everything Miguel represented. In several scenes captured by a camera installed in a corner of the room, I am wearing the full uniform: shirt, beret, badges, and even pants with a tactical belt. Marcelo asked me to march, to play recruit, and to obey orders as if he were the commander. In one of the shots, he orders me to kneel in front of the bed and then toasts with Miguel's personalized mug. I laughed, as if it were just a harmless joke. In another scene, he takes one of Miguel's medals that was left on the dresser and pins it to my lingerie. "Let us make the hero serve us properly now," he said, laughing. In another recording, he is seen tying my hands with Miguel's belt, saying that I was his prisoner. In another, it shows him grabbing my chin, telling me to look in the mirror and repeat that Miguel is weak. I repeated without thinking, without feeling, just to please a man I did not even admire deep down. It was cruel, it was sick, and it was all recorded there, without cuts, without excuses. When his father-in-law handed that material to Miguel, he was in shock and disappeared for 2 days. After that, he filed a lawsuit. Only then did I realize the size of the storm that was brewing. And worse, while all this was happening, I had already withdrawn over $7,000 from our joint account. I only left $20. I did not even realize how much I had become someone I never thought I could be. The house in ruins. All the accounts are in the red. My relationship with Marcelo, an illusion disguised as passion. And me, sinking deeper into my own emptiness. As much as I tried to justify it to myself, the truth was simple. I had abandoned Miguel, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. And now there was no turning back. He had proof. There were witnesses. He had the support of his father, his neighbors, even the community where he was respected. I tried to hide behind silence, denial, pretending that nothing had gotten out of control, but everything had already exploded and the shrapnel was everywhere. I just did not realize that the worst was yet to come, because Miguel did not just want to leave, he wanted justice, and maybe he was right. After all, who returns from war hoping to rebuild their life and finds their wife with another man in bed, dressed in their uniform, being recorded by their father? It was as if everything were a cruel game. And now, with the evidence in his hands and the weight of shame crushing me, all that was left was to wait for the consequences. There was no longer any way to pretend it was a passing affair. What I had done was brutal, unforgettable, and Miguel was ready to take revenge, not with violence, but with coldness, fairness, and with all the legal tools he knew. At first I still thought I could reverse everything. Even after the recordings, even with the public exposure, there was still a part of me, foolish and desperate, that believed Miguel could forgive me. After all, I was pregnant. Maybe that would make him hesitate, I thought. Maybe he would remember our history and decide to try again. I called. I sent a message. I tried to contact you by all means. Nothing. Absolute silence. The only response came through an official notification. Miguel had sued me for infidelity, breach of trust, and moral damages. It was real. And it was just beginning. I was called to testify at a preliminary hearing. I entered the room with my belly already visible and a cold fear invading my body. There was Miguel, sitting with his lawyers. Unflappable. He did not even look at me. Beside him, his father, firm, with a look as if he had already buried the daughter he never had. In front of me, they began to show the videos, now as legal evidence. The prosecutor paused some scenes to highlight phrases like, "If he is stupid, he will raise his child, and this is more mine than his." I felt my legs tremble. The baby kicked inside me, as if it were also reacting to the shame that was swallowing me alive. Miguel's defense was cruelly precise. They presented not only the recordings, but also bank records showing the withdrawal of $7,000 from our joint account, leaving only $20. They documented all the overdue bills, the unpaid invoices, the total abandonment of the home. They also submitted reports from neighbors who confirmed Marcelo's constant presence at random times. Everything, absolutely everything, conspired against me. I was no longer just an unfaithful woman. I was an unscrupulous traitor, a ridiculous figure in the eyes of the court. And Miguel did not need to shout or accuse. He let the facts do it for him. During the third session, the judge allowed one of the most devastating recordings to be played. In it, Marcelo said, with the utmost naturalness in the world, "We can make this idiot raise this child. We just have to pretend properly." The room was completely silent. Miguel's lawyer stopped the video and asked, "Were you aware of this?" I, with a dry throat, just shook my head. The judge frowned, visibly disgusted. "This type of behavior, Mrs. Lara, is disgusting. We are facing more than just a betrayal. We are facing a plan to deceive, manipulate, and exploit a man emotionally and economically in a vulnerable situation. This is monstrous." It was then that everything fell apart once and for all. Miguel showed up at the next hearing accompanied by a young woman, serene, with light eyes and simple manners, Bianca. I later found out that she had helped him when he was robbed weeks after returning from his mission. He protected her, and she has remained by his side ever since. She was living in our old house. She helped with the chores. She slept in the room where I used to sleep, and, in that moment, I realized, not only had I lost Miguel, but I had been replaced, and definitively, because Bianca not only loved him, but she also cared for him, something I stopped doing a long time ago. I still tried to appeal to Miguel's compassion. I begged him for a chance to talk, and he gave me more resources to help raise a child. Nothing helped. He did not want to listen. What little dignity I had left dissolved. Marcelo, in a desperate act, tried to argue that my behavior was a reflection of the psychological trauma caused by Miguel's abandonment. He said the war left him cold, distant, that I just wanted affection. The judge interrupted him, mocked his attempt to transform abuse into self-defense, and ridiculed him in front of everyone. I looked down. There was no longer any way to deny it. The house of cards I built collapsed, and the debris fell right on top of me. The first time I saw Bianca, I felt a pain that was not jealousy, but shame. She entered the room next to Miguel, with the calm posture of someone who does not need to prove anything to anyone. She dressed simply, held the case papers calmly, and even in silence, she seemed to say, "He is no longer alone." I later learned that she appeared in his life shortly after his return to the country. He defended her from an assault, and she stayed, literally. She began to help him during his recovery. Then, she lived with him and, little by little, occupied all the spaces that were once mine, but with dignity and respect. In everyone's eyes, Bianca was my opposite. While I lied, fled, and consumed, she cared, organized, and added. She started living in our old house. They made small renovations. She planted flowers in the garden I let dry up. She changed the curtains, painted the walls. Even the balcony came to life again. Miguel started playing the guitar again, they say. And when someone told me that he had a rose tattooed on his chest with her name, I felt something inside me die. It was the same gesture he wanted to get for me years before, but that I always said was too vulgar. For her, he did it without hesitation. What really destroyed me was when I found out that Bianca started working with him at the workshop. The same workshop that I found noisy, smelly, for people without ambitions. The former owner, a friend of Miguel's family, not only approved, but also offered her a permanent position as a secretary. She earned $2,200 a month, more than he earned in the reserves, and she did everything with great pleasure. I organized the service system, attracted new clients, labeled tools, cleaned up the accumulated mess. While I dreamed of air conditioning and meetings in glass rooms, she made the concrete floor become a place of belonging. And Miguel smiled. Photos began to circulate on the workshop's social media. Bianca holding a spreadsheet, helping with a car, smiling next to Miguel covered in grease. The clients loved her. They said the atmosphere had never been so welcoming, so alive. A mechanic commented on a post, "Now this workshop has a soul." It hurt me to see all this, because I knew it was meant to be my story. And, ironically, only now did I see the value of that simplicity I had always despised. The noise of the engines, the oil-stained hands, the smell of rust, everything I rejected, she embraced. Bianca also took on the role that was once mine, that of Miguel's wife, but not as I was. She was present, a companion, discreet. She brought his lunch to the workshop. She made a point of knowing each client by name. I went with him to buy parts at the junkyard and helped him negotiate prices. Even the workshop dog, which I had always ignored, now received homemade cookies every morning. She was not just with Miguel. She understood Miguel. I spoke his language, shared his routines, immersed myself with pleasure in his world and, most humiliating of all, without any apparent effort. Miguel never threw that in my face. I never published indirect phrases, never spoke ill of me in public. He simply moved on and, in a way, that is what destroyed me the most, because his silence was more eloquent than any shout. Bianca rescued him from the bottom of the pit I helped dig. She did not save him with grand gestures, but with the basics that I never offered him: presence, support, truth. In the end, there was no dispute. I lost him before I knew there was someone new in the story. I lost due to abandonment. I lost due to negligence. I lost because I never saw what he really needed. The final sentence was read in a cold room with beige walls and an uncomfortable silence. The judge did not need much time to decide. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were unanimous, and my expression, a mixture of resignation and emptiness. I lost the right to the house. I had to return part of the amount I withdrew from the joint account, money that no longer existed. I did not receive alimony or maintenance, and not out of cruelty, but because there was no legal basis to demand anything from those I destroyed. Miguel left the room without even looking at me. Bianca took his hand with the firmness of someone who knows she won, without needing to humiliate her. Marcelo, on the other hand, did not even bother to maintain the pose. As for his claim in the last hearing that I acted that way due to untreated trauma and that my infidelity was a direct result of Miguel's absences, of the emotional scars left by a structurally oppressive relationship, the judge, when delivering the decision, let out a laugh and said, "Mrs. Lara may be emotionally immature, but she is not incapable of discerning between right and wrong. What you did was a sequence of conscious and regrettable decisions." Marcelo lowered his head, but he still left the court with a defiant look, as if it were all just a badly played game. Shortly after the hearing, the company where we worked found out about everything. Marcelo was fired for just cause, and I was put on leave until the end of my pregnancy, not out of solidarity, but out of institutional shame. My name spread in internal groups, and it did not take long for people in town to comment on social media. Photos of me pregnant began to circulate with cruel captions. "The woman who wore her husband's uniform to cheat with her coworker." It was as if my story had become a joke, a tragedy, and a warning at the same time. Even those who did not know me judged me with conviction. Returning home was like walking on shrapnel. The neighbors looked the other way. My family called me in silence, not knowing what to say. The bills kept coming, and Marcelo, now unemployed, began to show who he really was. The mask fell quickly. He became aggressive, irritable, frustrated. We started arguing about everything, and, when the money ran out, the words turned into shouts, then threats. I tried to protect the baby, but I felt despair approaching like a wave about to swallow me. I was scared, and I knew that rock bottom had not yet arrived. The night everything exploded still echoes in my mind like a fast-paced movie. After a violent argument, Marcelo threatened to hit me. I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and ran out with the baby in my arms, but I tripped on the doorsteps, hit the iron fence, and tore the right side of my face. The pain was unbearable. The blood flowed as if my past had finally decided to mark my body. I received more than 50 stitches. I lost the vision in one eye. The baby, fortunately, was unharmed. A neighbor, who was a police officer, saw everything, captured Marcelo, and beat him before handcuffing him. Today, he is in custody for domestic violence and contempt, but the scar remained inside and outside of me. In that hospital bed, as I felt the bandage tighten against my disfigured face, I understood what karma meant, not as a mystical punishment, but as a real consequence. The decisions I made destroyed me, and now I am still trying to get up, not for myself, but for the son who depends on me. I still fight depression day after day. I still cannot look at myself in the mirror without remembering everything, but I try, because even though I am blind in one eye, even though I have scars for life, I am still a mother. And this child did not ask to be born into this chaos. I do not know if anyone will ever love me again. I do not know if I will forgive myself, but at least today I recognize the truth. The news came to me like a slow, cutting stab. Miguel and Bianca had married without fanfare, without a big party, just a small event with close friends in the same church where he and I exchanged rings years ago. He got a rose tattooed on his chest with her name, the same gesture he once promised to make with me, but which never came to fruition. And this time, it came to light. She began to sign with his last name, and together they took over the workshop as partners. That was the new beginning I had denied him. And now it was a new beginning that he lives with another woman, one that I myself threw away. They built together everything that I once said was too small for me. The workshop became more than a job. It was their home. Photos began to circulate showing Bianca pregnant, Miguel holding her belly with a proud smile. The two of them laughing on the sidewalk where one day he and I dreamed of renovating a broken grill. They told me he is lighter, that on weekends he started playing the guitar again, that he created a vegetable garden out back. Meanwhile, I was inside a small room alone, breastfeeding the son of a man arrested for violence, a son who did not ask to be born in the middle of chaos. After Marcelo was arrested, I tried to rebuild something, but the truth is that life does not go back to normal once you become the villain of your own story. The scar on my face, the result of falling on the fence during my escape, is visible from afar, a deep tear that runs down my right cheek to near my ear. It was more than 50 stitches. I lost the vision in one eye. The doctors said it was only a few millimeters, that the baby was not injured. The only thing that kept me going was this: he is fine. But every time I look in the mirror, I see the weight of my decisions reflected in the flesh. The nights are long. Sometimes I lie awake listening to my son breathe, wondering if he will ever ask me who his father was, or worse, if he finds out what I did. I try to prepare myself for this, but the truth is I do not even know how to explain it to myself. Depression consumes me in waves. There are days I cannot get out of bed, others where I pretend to be strong just so as not to scare my son. I am in therapy, taking medication, trying to hold on to any sign of light, but everything seems dark, as if I were paying a life sentence, not in prison, but in my soul. Worse than losing Miguel was losing the version of myself that existed when I was with him. That woman who was still capable of loving truly, of respecting, of caring. Today I am a wreck, trying not to cut those around me. A walking warning of what happens when we betray those who only wanted to protect us. And every time I see Bianca smiling next to Miguel in a shared post, I feel a mixture of pain and relief, because at least someone did for him what I could not. At least someone took care of the one I left to bleed alone. I do not know if anyone will ever love me again. With this scarred face, this crooked gaze, and this past dragging chains. But today I know love is not what we feel, it is what we choose to do, even when it is difficult. I chose wrong. I destroyed the man who loved me the most, and I was destroyed by the one who used me. Now the only thing I can do is try to be a mother, not out of merit, but out of moral obligation. My son is not to blame for the blood he carries. And maybe, just maybe, if I do everything right from now on, he might come to see me as something more than a mistake with legs, perhaps as a woman who tried to fix what she broke.